Hello and welcome to African Perspectives on Colonial Violence and Memory, where we interview scholars from the EPICUR region about their perspectives on memorial culture in their home countries and in the region. We are students from the Albert-Ludwigs University in Freiburg studying history. This podcast is a production sponsored by the EPICUR program and the International Office, and part of a seminar on colonial violence and remembrance led by Dr. Susanne Kuß. Freiburg University is part of the EPICUR region, which includes the universities of Basel, Strasbourg, Karlsruhe and Haute-Alsace. The program promotes cooperation between the universities and stipends seminars and projects that promote interregional cooperation.
Thank you and welcome to Dr. Gloria Nyambura Kenyatta for agreeing to be our first interview partner discussing memory and colonial violence in her home country Kenya, the EPICUR region, and the Kikuyu people, and how this connects to her research on developed government and gender equality. Dr. Kenyatta is a political scientist who has studied in Nairobi and written her PhD thesis at Freiburg University. She's a researcher at the Arnold Bergstresser Institute in Freiburg and teaches classes on African philosophy and political sciences at Freiburg University College. Dr. Kenyatta also identifies as Kikuyu. The day before the interview, she joined us in our seminar discussion about memorial culture in Tanzania and a broader East African region. The interview sometimes references this discussion. The interview was done by Anne Heger.
So our first topic is more about the practice of remembrance and less of the content. The contents we will get to in the third part. You do research about it. So how would you characterize the culture of remembrance in your country in one or two sentences, first of all?
That's a heavy topic to actually say in one or two sentences.
But your main focus, what is your impression of the culture surrounding colonial remembrance?
When we talk about culture of remembrance, especially in terms of colonial legacies, I would say in the context or where I come from, for me, it's an occasion to honor actually the freedom fighters, those who fought for the liberation of the country. That is one statement I would give, and maybe also for knowledge purposes. Yeah, for young people to know the past, what happened, and also to be able to navigate in the future. As I said, history is very important. Those who only say we need to focus in the future, I feel that is not the right way. You need to know the history so that you can be able to navigate the future. So I hope that is a very short statement.
Absolutely, and very interesting. So you would say the community aspect is very important. Like, first of all, the question of the past in the sense of the people that were involved, as well as giving on a legacy to the future generations.
Exactly.
Do you see this like this?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And do you feel personally that is kind of remembrance culture, or the question of colonial remembrance is part of your everyday life in Kenya, maybe, or also in Germany, but more in Kenya? Or does it not come up so often?
I think it comes up so often in our daily lives because, one, we do have, especially the community I come from the Kikuyu community. It's a community that has fighters of the liberation in the Kenyan context, and we usually call it the Mau Mau Rebellion. So for me, I have people of my past generation who are affected because I come from that particular community. So it's something that on a community level, on a family level, has an impact on me. Yeah.
Could you give an example for how this comes up in everyday communication, maybe, or in a place or something that is connected to it?
Something that is connected to it is that if you follow the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, we do have issue of confiscation of land. Yeah, we call it the Kenyan Highlands, whereby what happens when the colonial powers came, they identified land that was, good for agricultural produce. And that was the highland whereby the Kikuyu community was actually stationed. So what happened is that they had to confiscate land using their own policies that they put in place, and people were, taken away, put in specific reserves. Yeah. So when your land is taken away, later on after liberation, you can imagine, I'm sure not everyone actually was able to get that land back. And that is what we are grappling with in the Kenyan space, whereby people lost their land. And up to now, people have never been able to get that land back. So those are things we contemplate every day. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think very interesting and important questions that also affect the economic station of people and maybe also the religious ones.
Yeah, especially considering that we are people who we respect our ancestors. And of course, the final resting places was the land we had. Yeah. So you can imagine you don't know where your people are anymore because your land was taken away. So you are detached from that. Then what happens to you? It means it's destruction of identity and the people, who probably will be struggling actually to get their identity back.
Absolutely. So is there, I think you already talked a little bit about the question of collective memory. Is there a collective memory that goes beyond the Kikuyu community for you? Like, is there a Kenyan collective identity and maybe an East African collective identity or memory about colonialism?
Yeah, I do agree there is. When we talk about collective memory, I would say to a large extent, the country has one or has put mechanisms in place. For example, we have museums which are there, and also we have a curriculum that talks about the struggle or liberation in the Kenyan context. And having a curriculum in place that teaches young people or the upcoming generation what happened in the past, I would say that is very good, in terms of engraving those colonial legacies in the curriculum, having museums, and maybe also having debates, especially in institutions of higher learning like the universities, whereby debates are there on this struggle for democracy. Where are we as a country in terms of dealing with violences which were there during the colonial time and so on. And so for me, I feel that the collective memory is there because people have embraced it. No one opposes it in the country. Communities have also embraced it. So it is there actually to a very large extent.
So would you say the collective memory that is taught in schools, is it different from the memory that you encounter in your Kikuyu community or in your family, maybe in a traditional sense? Is there differences, or is it like on the broad the same narrative that is?
To some extent, it's very different. Yeah?
Okay.
Because what is there at the national level, you have the museums, you have what we call the curriculum that is there. But if you look at the curriculum and what is taught probably at the family level or at an individual level, the advantage we have at the family level, at the community level, is the issue of the oral tradition. And so you get detailed information. What has been sieved in the curriculum or even in the museums, you are able to get it from people who experience it. Because we have generations which are there who actually experienced it, but now they are older people. But of course, they remember what happened. And so you are able to get that in a very detailed way because it's, passing information by a word of mouth, which is oral tradition. So there's a big difference. What is in the books, what is in the museum, what is taught nationally, and what comes from the community is more detailed because of the oral tradition. And I see actually in some years to come or decades to come, this will have gone away if we are not able to capture it in some, written forms and ensure it's very detailed. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a long tradition of oral history, I think, but it's always difficult to capture it. I mean, I think you said about going in the field and interviewing people, probably an option, but of course, very long and difficult journey. Are there places that you specially connect to colonial memory or memory to colonial violence, like places that you are closer to remembering colonial violence than in other places?
Mm-hmm. I would say in many cases, places that you would place that colonial remembrance of those memories would be probably ritual sites or spiritual sites which were there at that particular time. And from the Kikuyu community, what we respect mostly, and we, especially when we do our prayers, is facing Mount Kenya. So that is our source of strength. And in many cases, we look up to our God, who we call Mwenenyaga, from that mountain. So those are places that we respect very much, as well as, I would say, burial sites, especially for our freedom fighters. Like in the capital city of Kenya, that is in Nairobi, we have a mausoleum, which is a tomb for our founding president, Jomo Kenyatta. And that place is really secure. It's a site, if you go there, of course, you will remember that this is someone who fought for the freedom of the country. We also have monuments of different freedom fighters in the country. For example, in one of the main streets in Nairobi, Dedan Kimathi and Mamangina Street, in the junction, we have a monument of Dedan Kimathi, who was a freedom fighter, actually. And so these are some of the things that remind us of that. Yeah.
Thank you. And are there special occasions that you most closely relate to memory?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I think the Kenyan government takes this issue very seriously. And so we have specific days that have been set aside to honor freedom fighters, to remember what happened during the colonial times, and even, in many times take the stock of how far you have come, things you have done, and what has not been done, to actually amend those atrocities which were done. For example, I would say we have a day on 20th of October called Mashujaa Day. Mashujaa is a Swahili word which means Heroes Day. So they organize, every county does organize on a rotational basis every year. There's also another day called Jamhuri Day, and this is when we celebrate our Independence Day. Yeah, when the country got independence. And in Kenya, we got our independence in 1963. That's on the 12th of October. Yeah. So we also have Madaraka Day, which is more of when the country got internal self-rule, not the Independence Day. So this is usually done on 2nd of June. And also we have Utamaduni Day. Utamaduni Day is basically to showcase your cultures, different communities, because in Kenya we have 44 ethnic tribes. So Utamaduni Day, it says that every community needs to come out there and showcase your cultures, because we have different cultures. So we have these specific days, which are also public holidays. So no one goes to work, to ensure that everyone is able to celebrate them and also, honor these heroes which were there, and also be proud of your cultures because they're important.
Thank you very much. Now we know a little bit more about the groups. And I think the diversity in the East African region, that is very often this way for old colonial structures. In this case, it's Kenya with its own ethnicity differences. But you also said there's a possibility and to celebrate it also on behalf of the government, basically, with a public holiday. Which is a nice thing, I think.
I think it's a nice thing because if it wasn't a public holiday, then a lot of people would be going to work and no one would actually celebrate them. So having a public holiday whereby people are able actually to plan and attend and, honor these heroes makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we would like to talk a little bit more about the contents of what is actually remembered after we talked a little bit about the structures. are there any particular objects in your country that symbolize the memory of colonialism? And which kind of memory do they carry?
Mm-hmm. That's quite a tough question. But I would say that in the Kenyan context, I see maybe objects and items which remind us of these colonial legacies or memories we have. One would be, if you go to the Kenyan context, you would have streets which are actually named after the colonial administrators we had. Yeah, different streets which are there. For example, I know that we had a street that is called Duke of Conangat, and so on and so forth. Yeah, there are so many streets which have colonial administration names. But I think things are changing with the Constitution of Kenya 2010 that brought very, decentralized governments which are in charge of different towns in different cities. And so names are now getting changed. Yeah. We also have different landscape, specific areas in the country which are named after those colonial administrators and masters. And for example, I would want to say those names of these different urban centers are actually there even up to now. They have never been changed. We have Hurlingham, Lavington, Riverside, Spring Valley, and so on and so forth. And also parks, these parks whereby people go to relax, I would not say animal parks and so on. I think here we call them Spielplatz or whatever, where children go to play and so on. So we have like one in Nairobi which is called Jivanji Park. And this park is actually named after an Indian businessman. Yeah? Because during the colonial times, what happened is that there were laws which had been put in place to determine who is a citizen and who is a subject. And Africans were subjects. And the colonial settlers, including the Indians, were actually citizens. And when you talk about subjects and citizens, subjects do not have rights, political rights, civil rights, and so on and so forth. But Indians had because they were mostly businessmen. Yeah. So we have parks which are named after them, but also we have, I would say, statutes like the Lord Delamere Statute. We also have Queen Victoria Statute and so on and so forth. So we have statutes which are there. We have monuments which are there. But I also want to say that things are changing slowly because they are now being, I would say, brought down and new ones coming up to honor the freedom fighters. So these things are there. But also museums are places whereby you actually get to see these collective memories in them. And in Kenya, I am happy that we have different museums which are there. I think about 22 museums distributed all over the country that tell you if you enter them, then you are able to see these histories there. So which is a good thing. Yeah.
And very interesting. I think for Germany, this is also this discussion that is actually very in the time that is will change, but very slowly and very difficult.
Yeah, it's a gradual journey. I would say it's not easy.
So, of course, the main focus of our seminary is colonial violence and remembrance. What role does violence, especially colonial violence, play in the memory of maybe the Kikuyu, but also Kenya as a nation?
That's a very heavy question when you ask about the role of violence, especially colonial violence. Because for me, what I see, it's what role it plays. It is actually a destruction of a people.
Yes.
You destroy people completely. Because if you drive them away from their land, this is their ancestral land. This is where their culture is. This is whereby their ancestors have been buried. This is what they know. And you drive them away. Then you are actually destroying their identity. And if you destroy someone's identity, then it's of course, people say that identities are built as you move over. But your main identity in the African culture is very important. And so for me, the main role this colonial violence played is actually destroying a people.
this is, I think, very astute, but is it a topic in, for example, you said the curriculums in schools, do you talk about colonial violence in this sense? Or is it like more a non-topic that is not talked about so much if talked about the colonial times?
I think it's talked about very much in the curriculum, especially because what is in the curriculum is, in many cases, they will talk about the Mau Mau rebellion. Yeah. How the fights happened, what happened, how people were killed, how people lost their way of life, their cultures, what was, in many cases, I would say it's about loss of life, property, cultures, and culture is very important in the African setting because it makes you who you are. Yeah. But of course, in many cases, what is left out is probably what was looted, issues of looting, especially artifacts that has been left out. Yeah.
You have talked a lot about the Mau Mau already, I think also because of your background. But are there other colonial atrocities talked about that are not the question of liberation and the Mau Mau war before this?
Yeah, I think what is not talked about is maybe Mau Mau is talked about because it was the main, rebellion that led to the independence of the country. But we also have part of the country in the Rift Valley where we had the Nandi resistance, yeah, which was led by Koitalel, Arab Samoa. And this was done after the railway construction because the railway construction actually, which was the entry to now colonial rule in East Africa, if you read the history of African, which was done, I think, between 1896 to about 1901. Yeah. So what happened after the completion of that specific railway, then the resistance actually started from the Nandi, the Rift Valley, the Nandi community. And so that one, in many cases, is not talked about so much because it's not the main one and it did not last for long. But it's a very important resistance because what happened, Samoei Koitalel, once he was captured, actually his skull was taken to London and up to now we have never gotten it back. So we still come to those violences whereby human remains were actually taken and have never been brought back. Yeah. So that is a resistance that I feel that especially in the curriculum is missing because we have focused on this main struggle for independence and left that one, which was also very important because they were resisting the colonial rule in the country. Yeah.
Very interesting as well with the seminary topic yesterday.
Yeah, of these human remains because it's a struggle. And the Nandi community has always, I think it's more than 111 years now, from 1902 thereabout. So, yeah, these are the dilemmas we are in, whereby our leaders who are there, freedom fighters, their remains were taken away and the government is just quiet. That is what I would say.
Difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, you said already it's a heavy topic to talk about colonial violence, and I absolutely agree. Even with a little bit of time and space between me and the violence, it's heavy to talk about these kind of things. But you also talked about oral history of your elders. Is there colonial violence a topic that is talked about, or do they try to not talk about it so much? Because, of course, it is a kind of trauma as well, and maybe not as easy to talk about it if you lived through it yourself.
I think the oral tradition is even the one that gives you as it is, not sieving anything. So a lot of things we know about what happened, especially in regards to human remains or, forced labor, raping women, and so on and so forth. It's actually passed through oral traditions, not in curriculum. Because I feel that in terms of curriculum, there's this aspect of wanting to be diplomatic. Yeah. And so you sieve out those things that are really, what can I say? The things that would be seen to affect people so much. So oral tradition gives you as it is. But when you go to the curriculum, things are sieved out. So that's the difference.
Very interesting. Thank you. It's, I think, fascinating to see maybe different approaches to oral traditions as well. Is there a public debate now in the nation of Kenya about the themes and ways of remembering colonialism? Or is it like there is a narrative that everyone can agree on? You said things were changing. Is there like conflict about it, or is it more or less a compromise way, or is it everyone can agree on it?
I think in the Kenyan context, everyone agrees on the narratives that are there in terms of colonial violence. The only thing I would say that the public debate at the moment is what is given more weight and what is not given more weight. And those are the things even communities keep on grappling with, yeah? So these atrocities which were done in one communities have been given more weight and some have not been given more weight. But all this, even those who fought before the Mau Mau struggles were actually fighting because also fight for liberation is a gradual process and it's a culmination of many struggles from every side, yeah? So like the Nandi resistance and also the Mau Mau rebellion and so on and so forth. So which one do you give more weight and which one don't you give more weight? So I feel that probably some communities feel they have been left out and others feel that, we fought for the liberation. We are the ones who should decide how this country progresses and so on and so forth, which is not a good trend in a country because it should ensure that every community is included, whether you fought or not fought, because we are all Kenyans. So how it's done, probably there's a need to see how this can be balanced.
Is there a discussion about the main narrative or like the way to remember in the Kikuyu community?
Within the community? I think within the communities there are different rituals which are done. And I wouldn't go into in-depth details about it because I haven't attended any. But there are always rituals which are done because in the Kikuyu community, what we had is a decentralized system, not a centralized system of governance. And so we have the higher decision-making organ is the Council of Elders. So we have very strong Council of Elders in the Kikuyu community, which would probably do these rituals now and then. But also many Kikuyus actually, in terms of those who are still in the tradition religion, would do their own rituals. And this we do it facing Mount Kenya also at the same time, because we find it as a source of strength maybe. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting to hear all of these things. And there are so many levels that you have to think about.
Yeah, actually and it's really very complicated in Africa. I think it's because of the diversity of the communities and how people do things differently. And also we struggle with different communities, some feeling, we are better than others, which is not really good because diversity should probably be something of strength. You have this diversity. When you bring them together, it should be able to unite people. Yeah.
We already talked a little bit about the national narrative versus the local narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In which way does the remembrance of colonialism and colonial violence helps nation building or maybe also hinders nation building? What would you say for the Kenyan example now?
I think having museums and commemoration days, which are public holidays, it helps nation building in terms of people would know, especially the history of the country. Because if the museums were not there, these public holidays were not there, issues of curriculum was not there. Because I remember when I was in primary school, we had these histories there. So as you progress going to secondary school, then the context becomes details, yeah? But of course, there are issues which are left out. I think it's important for nation building because you need to ensure everyone is on the same page. You need to let your little people or your little ones who are growing know the past of a country. Yeah.
But of course, the curriculum can only do so much. So maybe some communities will feel left out. Do you think this is a problem, especially for the Kenyan side, or is Kenya actually successful in your opinion, in building a nation through a common narrative?
I think, of course, communities which were not involved in the struggle wouldn't get the detailed bit of it. So the curriculum is not only enough, but also I would say movement from one corner to the other, because people are not confined to one area. Actually, Kenya is very much, there's a lot of mingling between the communities. So I wouldn't say that people don't know about it, but probably if you're not from the Kikuyu community or the Nandi community, you may not know some of the details which are there. Yeah. And even young people, if you don't have a lot of time with the older people, then you may not be able to get these narratives of colonial legacies into detailed.
Absolutely. So we now will talk a little bit about the place of Europe, because of course as a colonial power. It's maybe also a difficult topic, but no problems here. Do the patterns, forms of memory in Europe somehow influence narratives in Kenya and the Kikuyu community? Do you talk about it, or is it even something that is discussed, or not at all a topic?
It depends. That question, is it discussed on the other side abroad in Africa or here?
And now for your perspective, so for you, is it discussed in Kenya how, for example, Great Britain remembers their empire or their colonial legacy?
Let me tell you, I think even in the curriculum I have heard, even in the university level, what happens in London, or in Britain, it's never discussed back in Kenya. Yeah. So the only discussions would be whether there has been bilateral talks between the Kenyan government and London. But in terms of London or Britain actually honoring Kenya in terms of the atrocities they did, that discussion is never featured in the country. So what we only know is that, of course, this is a country that was colonized. These are the atrocities which were done, and this is where we are. Yeah,
interesting.
As a country. But in terms of what happens in Britain, let me tell you, not many Kenyans even know whether there are even monuments there that really honor freedom fighters in Kenya. And I don't think it can ever happen even.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But of course, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, during the COVID time, I think there was also a big question in Great Britain about the questions of statues and if they should be taken down. Did this somehow feature in Kenyan discussions?
It did. It did feature in Kenyan discussions, and that is why at the moment you wouldn't find any statues of the colonial administration actually in Kenya. Probably apart from the Queen Victoria one, and a castle we have actually of Lord Dolamea in Elbagon, not many of them still exist up to now.
And this changed into 2020, 2022, something like this?
When we got the new constitution and we got devolved county governments, because they're the ones now who decide. What happens is that the county governments, which are more like, what can I call them? The federal governments you have here, whereby you have regional governments. In Kenya, we call them county governments. And they have mandates to decide items or monuments within their jurisprudence, so if you have a monument or a street that is named after colonial administrators, you can decide. Your local parliament can decide whether they want to retain or not retain. And so having that, I think it's the best thing that happened to Kenya, because now you can decide who to name as a street, as an urban center, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think this is a good structure as well for this kind of decisions, because they can be made locally.
Yeah.
Now, you already live quite a few years in Germany, I think. How does colonial memory or memory of colonialism and colonial violence feature in your life here, for you personally? Is it a topic that comes up often, or is it something you don't think about all the time?
I think it depends also. For me, because I am in an institute that deals on Africa, Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, it's an issue that constantly features, especially with my colleagues here, because they focus on those areas. And we even have a decolonization project here, actually. So some of the colleagues are doing. So for me, it features so many times, yeah? We have had different workshops on colonial legacies in Africa. I have also taught at the university, especially the university college, on issues of colonial legacies and so on. So for me, I see it on everyday life, yeah? Because it's a discussion topic within the institute. But I feel that outside this institute and maybe the university is not an issue that is given more weight. And I also think that the university probably weight is only put on specific seminars or courses which are given. Because if you went to the University of Freiburg and asked students how many really know about colonial legacies in Africa, especially in Africa, I don't know whether the percentage would even be 15%. I think it's even less than that. So it's not an issue that is given more weight. It depends. There are specific people, like now you are specific instructor, Frau Susanne Kuß. I know her. She is into this topic because also we have done curriculums in Namibia, because Germany and Namibia have, relations, including Tanzania. So I know her class features this, but others I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you can go through the university, study history, and not get into context much with colonial history or colonial legacy.
Yeah. And so I wonder, why is it not to unravel what happened? I have no idea, because also it's important for young people to know these colonial legacies so that history does not repeat itself. I'm not sure, but I think it's important.
I absolutely agree, but it's still difficult to include it into a public that is not disinformed about it, I think. Do you see colonial legacies in Germany that is just like an example that would come into your head at the moment?
I don't know. Let me tell you, I haven't experienced any colonial legacy in Europe. Maybe it's the fact that I am with colleagues probably who understand all these colonial legacies. But maybe a point I would want to point out, a case I would want to point out is when issues of race come up, yeah? Because I would say, like, the Kenyan case in terms of colonialism is very special, because what happened is that when the colonial administrators came, the Britons, their main approach of governance was segregation, dividing the blacks and the whites, yeah? And so this was because they saw themselves to be superior, yeah? The whites were superior than the blacks. But as I have lived all my life, I am now almost going to 40, actually.
You don't look like it.
I have lived in Kenya, and at no particular time did I ever, and this is something I always talk to my friends, even colleagues here, at no any particular time did I ever think about my, what can I say, the color of my skin, what race am I? Because it never features anywhere in Kenya, because we are all the same, whether you are mixing with Indians and so on. So everyone is, seen equally. But now when I came to Europe, in many cases, you sit down and it's the first time it hit me, and I was like, oh my goodness, I am black. This is something I never thought about, and it's not really easy for people of color actually in Europe. So I don't know whether this could also be linked to colonial legacies, whereby there's these aspects of, people see themselves different. But I just want to leave it at that.
Absolutely. Yeah. A last question to this topic, and then we will continue with EPICUR, I think. For you personally, would you generally rate the form that is most common in Kenya about remembrance of colonial history and colonial violence? Is it positive or negative, broadly, like more than the other?
I think generally, I would say these dominant forms of remembrance, they're generally positive because there's that inclusivity of everyone within the country. If it's commemoration days, everyone is given a public holiday and you can do this. Issues of monuments, issues of museum. The only part that I see that, has been left out and which is a negative form is whereby some are given more attention than others, yeah? This resistance which happened, whereby the government needs to probably do something to ensure inclusivity. But also remember, this Mashujaa Day, where there's rotation or part of it, it's more to include everyone. So that is a positive one.
Absolutely. So in your opinion, what is necessary for a positive culture of remembrance? How can it be successful in a diverse nation like Kenya?
Maybe one of the major things is about sensitization and dissemination, which needs to be done maybe a standard form way of doing it. Apart from curriculum, can we ensure that there is a sensitization program of all the communities so that what has been sieved out probably is included? And this needs to happen at the community level, yeah? Every community within the country. That would be really important. But also, how do we ensure that every community is involved? Apart from rotating the Mashujaa Day, is there any other way we would ensure? Because I know we have a Ministry of Heritage and Culture and Sports that deals with this national heritage, issues of culture and so on. Is there a way that we could have a multi-stakeholder of including all communities in planning on all these things? That would really be important. But also, maybe having formal policies from the government, because I'm not sure whether we have policies. Maybe we do have policies on how do we treat our national heritage and so on. But in terms of colonial violence that happened and how do we treat that, yeah, within the communities and even at the national level, that is still lacking in the Kenyan context. Because policy gives you procedures, it gives you a systematic way of dealing with issues that happened. And if you don't have it, then you are bound to do things in a haphazard way in terms of how you treat these atrocities. Which communities do you give a upper hand? Which one do you leave out and so on? So having a policy, it means inclusivity, doing things in a systematic way, and also ensuring that everyone is actually included.
I think a very nice view of it. Mm-hmm. And I think a few things are already in place in Kenya. Mm-hmm. So this is why you said it's more positive.
Yeah, it's more positive. Yeah. So as I said, it's things that we are still grappling with as a country, but we are not also, backwards as other countries. We are looking forward. Yeah.
I think also important for a nation, because only living in the last 50 years is maybe not the way to ensure future wealth and equality.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you for this more thematic part of our interview. We now come to the fourth part, which is the EPICUR part. I already told you that about its funded project for EPICUR, so this is why we put a few questions in there. Mm-hmm. EPICUR is the region of Germany, France, and Switzerland, and the border region near the Rhine. So the cooperation with Basel University, Strasbourg University, and Karlsruhe University, of course, Freiburg University. So they fund us. So this is why we would like to hear something about this as well. You are employed in the Albert-Ludwigs Institute, which is somehow linked to the university, but you also have teaching position, I think, at the university college, at least sometimes. Mm-hmm. So you are connected to University Freiburg and therefore to the EPICUR region and the project. How present is this program in your everyday life at university? Do you come into contact with it at all?
Let me say that I have been in Germany for 4 years now. And in the beginning, it was very rare to hear anyone talk about colonial issues. But for me, I think in the last 2 years, there's a lot of focus on colonial legacies, especially which are linked to Germany as a country. I hear a lot cases about Tanzania and Namibia. So I would say that Germany as a country and the universities which are there are doing something about it, but also not given maybe the attention it deserves, which needs to happen. As I said, working at RBE, this is an issue that is discussed everywhere. And the director of RBE, that is Professor Andreas Meller, he's actually into this discussion. He knows Africa very well. And as I said, we have a decolonizing project here that has been funded, and we have colleagues working on it. Yeah. So for me, it's not a rare occurrence at RBE. At the university, it depends. Maybe the history department knows more about this, but other departments, I'm not sure. And I think it's an issue that needs to be given attention because histories are important, and especially African histories. Probably, yeah. So it is there, but not to the attention or, given the attention it deserves, which should be the case.
Do you think the transnational cooperation in the EPICUR region can help these kind of projects, or is this not the correct approach for it?
I think it should. It should, because in many cases when you work, not alone, as we say, these universities coming together and collaborating, it would be important. And maybe also, collaborating with scholars from Africa who are specifically into this topic, who understand these colonial legacies, who are probably in African history departments in different universities. It could boost this. Yeah. I believe having different universities tackling this and having a project, it's important because also you need resources to do this type of, what do we call it? Reciprocal research from both ends. So yeah, I would say, and what they are doing, even having this podcast project, I think it's important because when we talk about remembrance of colonial violence, it's a delicate issue, and you need people who would want to speak out as it is, what happened, yeah, and not people who would want to sieve issues out, yeah.
Absolutely. So for your own personal research, did you get into contact with other EPICUR universities, or is it not relevant for this, what you were doing up until now?
I think it's relevant because my research is connected in this way, because I look at participatory democracy, especially at the local level. How is it done at the local level? And this has a long history linked to colonial legacy, because during colonial times, the subjects were not part of, participation. And so where I'm coming from is we have had for a long time an administration system whereby people would take a back seat and let the state actors, make decisions on their behalf. And so for me, I think it's a very important project and topic whereby we see, detaching from the past and now moving forward to whereby the subjects are the ones who are doing things on their own. And I think the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was voted by many people because of the prospect of making decisions, speaking up and saying things, and deciding what, their future development should be. So, yeah, I see a big influence in terms of what EPICUR is doing and also the research projects which are funded, being able to detach from the colonial past and trying to move forward in a better way. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions where the cooperation could be more closely I mean, maybe more broad suggestions, but also very specific ones?
Maybe it is important. I'm not sure, especially when I focus to the University of Freiburg, whether it has any department that handles African history.
I don't think so. I think the department is in Basel.
But that would be something probably different that the University of Freiburg would want to do. And this would be important, having an African department, because students from University of Freiburg would actually not go to Basel to do African history. And I say this because when I was teaching the Ubuntu philosophy in the university college, many students who were in that class, I think about 20, thereabout, none of them had been to Africa. They don't know what is Africa. Africa is very diverse. Actually, sometimes when I read about Africa, I get lost, because what is done in West Africa and what is done in East Africa is totally different, actually. So this would probably help. Having an African department that students could have courses knowing, oh, I want to learn about Africa. What is Africa? I want to learn about colonial legacies. What is, I want to learn about cultures. I want to learn about ABCD from Africa. Then it would be important.
Is there anything that you would like to add? Like we talked about a lot of different topics.
Yeah.
And I think we, from our place, this is the questions we would like to ask. And you have given us very much to think about, and I think to use as well. Is there anything that was missing, or that you would like to add?
I would want to add something else. I know that we do have an Erasmus program, and we do have students who usually go abroad to do their program, I think for 6 months, and then come back. But it would be important to have most students actually go to Africa and get to know what it is and what happens on that other side of the continent. Yeah? But I also see a lot of African students coming, but I would also want to see more students coming and others going to Africa. That's the only way you can learn what Africa is.
I think the exchange part is very important. There is an exchange with the University of Stellenbosch since 2019, which is not this long. So I think they have 2 full year prospects of basically four possibilities for students to go there on a semester basis. So
yeah,
the
but it would be important to have more collaboration with universities in many African countries so that you get to learn. For example, in Kenya, Nairobi University, which is usually said it's the best in terms of ranking, it would be important to go there. If it's Tanzania, I'm not sure whether it's Makerere University or which one else, but it's important. Yeah.
I think so too. So thank you very much for answering our questions. It was very interesting talking to you yesterday as well as today. I think we will get a lot of very interesting facts about it.